Welcome, everyone, to this wonderful conversation we're about to have with three really amazing filmmakers in our very own Vancouver community. I'm Anushka Ratnaraja. I'm the artistic director at Out on Screen, and my pronouns are she and hers. And I'm going to start off this conversation just by asking each person if we can go around, give our names and pronouns. And Out on Screen, we're trying to deepen our relationship to land acknowledgements and sort of give them a little bit more space than just a rote thing that you say, but to engage with them and think about them a little bit more and encourage our audiences to do the same. So I'll talk a bit about which lands I'm situated on and how I come to them. And if you lovely panelists could do the same when you're giving your short introduction, that would be awesome. Yeah. So as I said, Anushka, she and hers. I'm currently living on Musqueam territory, and I live and work and traverse in pandemic and non-pandemic life on the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories that are unceded and occupied. And that's where Out on Screen also does most of its organizing, although Out in Schools travels to other territories throughout British Columbia. Yeah, I was born on these territories, but my mom is a white settler, British umpteenth generation, and my father is Sri Lankan Tamil settler immigrant. And yeah, I was born on these territories. I grew up on Tsawwassen territories, and I've moved around a little bit, but have always ended up here. So yeah, that's me. And I can pass it on to, I'm going to pass it to my left, which is Jen, but might be somebody else at some point. So I'm going to Jen.
Thank you, Anushka. My name is Jen Sunshine, and I am currently in the Fraser View area on Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish land. My relationship to this land is as a settler. I'm also a first-generation Taiwanese Canadian, so I was born in Taiwan. And I always say that my culture shock coming to Canada was first noticing the Indigenous solidarity looks very different than the Indigenous in Taiwan. Our Aboriginal solidarity looks very different there, where in Taiwan, we have, I think it's 16 officially recognized Aboriginal groups and tribes. And so I grew up very integrated with the Aboriginal communities in Taiwan, and we have famous Aboriginal singers and actors and actresses that I would watch on screen and on TV. And so coming here as like a 9-year-old and not really understanding the politics and the land we're on, there was a bit of that kind of culture shock. And so, of course, I, much like many of my circles, I learned more and more around the Indigenous solidarity and struggles here that look so different in the North American context or Turtle Island context. But I really grew to attune and enmesh with the coastal like rainforest, and I feel like I've really absorbed the dampness and the wetness that's like here, and so I have a particular fondness to the rainforest of Vancouver, and so that relationship to like nature, I think, taught me a lot about my relationship to like sense and place, and all of that, and the sense of place has really played an integral role to my art making and to my filmmaking process. So I'll just leave it at that. I use she, her pronouns also. And I will pass it to Amy.
All right, my name is Amy Fox. My pronouns are she or they. I was born in Michigan, and I have not looked up the history of that land. I don't know it. I should. I will. I now live on what I believe is Squamish Nation territory, but I should go and check that out as well. But I moved throughout Vancouver in what is Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And oh boy, this extra level of interaction is good, but it is new to me. I am frequently surprised by the violence and inequity that this remnants of this like feudalistic mercantile landholding system imposes on like pretty much everybody, especially Indigenous people. But this is a bad system, and I see this race to own land rooted in a bad system that encourages everybody to sort of step on everybody else, work as much as you can to outbid everybody else. And there are definitely better ways of doing more affordable housing. And in fact, the Squamish Nation has done them. And the rest of Vancouver could really learn from that, where it's, no, you don't own the land, you lease it for a very, very long, for probably longer than you will be alive. So there are some lessons there that I will be very happy to see the rest of Vancouver switch over to. Oh, I'm sorry. and I will pass things on. Bruna.
Thank you. So my name is Bruna Arbex. I'm originally from Brazil. I moved here 5 years ago, and currently I am living also, and I acknowledge that, on the Squamish Nation territory. But it's interesting. I think I can talk more in terms of a conversion. Oh, and I go by she and her. And I can talk more in a comparison between where I'm from to what I notice here, because Brazil is also country that went through a very aggressive colonization process, and very much so we still live within those spirits, even though it has been years that we proclaimed that we were free. But it's something that has impact and caused great loss and damage to the population in general. And I came to learn moving here, which I didn't know before moving here, that was such a similar situation, and that until this day we fight against inequality in those terms. So I can definitely relate and more than support and be part of the cause, because I come from a very similar background in terms of that. Even though the colonization happened in a very different way in South America than in North America, we still carry that same baggage, I believe. And yeah, I'm a filmmaker. I moved here to focus specifically on that, and thankfully I'm being able to keep going and producing and following those steps to become an even more experienced filmmaker that I was when I got here.
Those were such generous and thoughtful, deep answers. Thank you all so much for going on that little journey. Yeah, that was great. And I think it's so important to reflect upon, because I just think about land and decolonization from the storytelling perspective, and how many stories are denied to us to be heard, to be told, to be seen, and how much work we have to do to uplift those stories, and give the space that we take up, so that those stories can be breathe and grow in the ways that they deserve to. Yeah. And I guess in thinking about stories, and we've agreed that this can be a free-flowing conversation as well, but in just thinking about that and some of the questions that I had for you all, is you're all storytellers. So I was just wondering, what has been your journey into storytelling so far, and when did you realize that you wanted film to play a major role in that journey? and anyone can go, whoever is inspired.
Well, I guess I can start then. I think like I actually realized I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was 12, which was really funny because when I was 12, there was literally no other women or identifying women filmmaker that I could look as inspiration or a mirror. And I remember I would talk to my parents like, "Oh, I really want to make films, but I never see a woman doing it. Can I do it? Is it something that I can do?" And even though they're really supportive and always helped me and supported me in my decisions, they're like, you can make films as a hobby and then you can have a job. I was like, okay, fair. And that's what I did before moving here. And with the years passing by, I was working with video production, but for marketing. And that was destroying my soul slowly. It was like, no, I need definitely to shift towards film. Like, I have to follow that. And even though we have amazing filmmakers and an amazing scope of work from Brazil, it's really hard to live by that craft. You can exercise it, but there's no guarantee that you can make a living by doing so. So I decided to take the jump and move to a country that I could potentially do that. And by moving here, I actually put it into action what I really wanted, which was work with film in general. I do still work with marketing here and there to complement what we need to make a living here because it's not that cheap of a city. But yeah, it's definitely, I feel that like now I'm finally fulfilling those dreams that I set in stone when I was really young. So it definitely feels really good.
My relationship to film starts with Out on Screen, actually. And Mishka, you know this because you've heard me gush extensively about my journey and my relationship with Out on Screen.
Yes.
And specifically with the Queer Film Festival, which is now going on a relationship of like 15 years, I want to say. In my early 20s, I started attending the Queer Film Festival. And at the time, I cared a lot about, and I still do, I still care a lot about representation, but I think it was much more important to me for my identity as like a Taiwanese lesbian to see a Taiwanese lesbian queer film on the big screen. So that was kind of my first foray into like, oh, this is what representation and how that resonates with me. But it wasn't until I started working at Out on Screen and running the Out in Schools program where I recognized the power of film, because I was able to like firsthand bring queer film to schools across the province to have that direct impact on young people in schools. And so I guess I didn't mention that I'm the co-artistic director of Love Intersections, which is now 7 years old. So
wow.
Yeah, I know. Time is, what is time?
Time is wild.
Yeah. So I co-founded Love Intersections with my longtime creative collaborator, David Ng, and which is a media arts organization that produces documentary film primarily, focusing on the stories of QT BIPOCs. And it started actually with just simply writing our, dissatisfaction with how queer people of color are portrayed in Hollywood, but also on the internet. And at the time when blogs were really popular, we started blogging about it. Some articles went viral. And from there, we decided that actually what is the most digestible form of content at the time were like short videos. And so we decided to create these short documentary videos just to put the feelers out there and to kind of, in so many ways, represent ourselves as queer Asian, as queer people of color. And shortly after that, 7 years later, we've produced a roster of documentary film, the longest being 20 minutes, but we've yet to kind of enter into like feature length, which is terrifying to me because I have no idea how to run a crew. But I think I'm very much a community-based and a community emerging filmmaker, as opposed to I guess what you could say like an industry filmmaker or industry-based filmmaker. And I know that they're like quite distinct, separate worlds, although there is some overlap. Yeah, so I'll just kind of leave it at that.
All right, cool. For storytelling, I've been interested in our ability to create a narrative for each other since I was about 12 years old or so. And I really like these choose your own adventure books. But my mom by accident bought me a role-playing game that was made by the same company. And I ran that for all my friends for my 12th birthday party. And that was my hobby, right? Because you could make a story that suited you and this circle of people around you, and you could make your own character. And you were still like, didn't even have the internet for a few years there, so you were still like, and you're a kid, right? So you're still, it's like, this person's going to hand you this thing. This is how you do it. How do you modify it? How do you customize it? It's still fairly constrained. And once I got into my 20s, I moved from that into making LARPs. So that's like interactive, immersive drama. Everyone comes with their own character. You tell a story that goes on month to month to month to month to month. And then when in my late 20s, one of the great like trans leaders in the city, Tianyo Emas, was running a thing at the time that was called Happy Tranny Day. And the next year they're like, okay, maybe we'll call it something else. But the second year, my friend Beth Marston volunteered me to do a comedy routine and asked to be part of the comedy routine. And we did it. And speaking of creating our own narratives, we had this bunch of trans people there, and there were a couple of like paid acts, and I'd never performed like that before, right? And neither had she. And when we got the feedback, the two top items were, hey, we love the free food. And two, oh my God, there was a transgender comedy routine. So Beth and I had this comedy routine, and we wound up living in different cities. And we're like, okay, we've got this comedy routine that appeals to trans people. Okay, how much money would it take to travel from point to point to deliver this to how many trans people? And oh my God, we can't afford gas or hotels. So what are we gonna do? Well, a web series sounds pretty straightforward, and now you can buy a camera that will shoot in 1080p video, which is sitting on a shelf back there in my like garage / with my temporary home with my film studio during COVID. We just were like, okay, we're going to do this thing 2 years from now. And I went off to Langara Film Arts because it's this wonderful local college that like teaches filmmaking, and it's a short period of time, and the fees are very accessible compared to like literally anywhere else you can study filmmaking. It's like the most accessible, and yet it's a wonderful professional driven program. We made a web pilot, and then we talked to someone named Jack Fox, no relation, who worked for Out TV, and they're like, how about we expand that? And so we got like a TV pilot deal, although we like were crowdfunding most of that in community funding and favors and so on. And we made the TV pilot, and then it was like, okay, if you want to make more of this, a lot of stuff needs to change, guys, because you've never shot a TV pilot before. And we're like, okay. And we shot a 6-episode TV season called The Switch. And that's just, it just sort of like emerged. And I was like, yeah, I'll do film, and then I'll go back to like whatever the hell else I'm doing. Maybe I'll like go back to trades or something. Yeah. And I've wound up creating this company along with other people. We specialize in the intersection of diversity and genre. With The Switch, we really wanted to move outside of the space that was like biopics and like really depressing stories, often with no trans people anywhere involved, and do like the opposite of that, where it's like a comedy and it has like magical realist elements and weird cutaways, and we have like trans people making it and trans people starring in it. Yeah, and I don't know, I kind of just stuck with film. Sunk costs.
That resonates a lot with me too, in the sense that like I really wanted to like not play into the mainstream, even the community narratives around what our story should look like. The kind of the trauma porn and the like sob stories and the like parents kick me out because etc., you know, then that narrative, which is not to reduce the reality of that narrative, but it's just having a diversity of different narratives out there. It was definitely something that I'm very, very motivated by, especially around the question of like, every time someone finds out I'm queer, they always ask that invariably, how, you know, are you out to your parents, and how do they feel about that, you know, when it's a very great relationship. So I think people really, it's interesting when people aren't given the stereotypes that they want to consume too.
That's a good like point to jump off of in terms of like the kind of storytelling that you all do, because you all have work that's like very unique in terms of like the different genres or styles that you work in, and the subject matter is like, you all are very, very different. But yeah, I'm curious about where you drew your inspiration for storytelling, and yeah, what are you interested in changing in storytelling and in like the film industry from like your perspective and your all your different intersecting identities, you know? Small question, just like very chill, no, you know.
But you know what? Sometimes I think, and obviously it's a really hard statement to make, but I'm not so sure if I would jump into filmmaking if I wasn't queer, or knew since a young age I was queer and I couldn't verbally express what I was feeling. So that's why when I was so young, you would like start crafting and writing and creating all those stories inside your head, because you're like, reality doesn't fit me, so I must have to create something, right? And I wasn't in a very conservative environment that I thought that I would never be able to tell anyone. It was like, I need to die with this secret. No one's going to know. Obviously, that changed after, but thankfully. But I think that initially, like, that was the first push, and like living in my head and creating my own stories. And I think that reflects quite a lot on the films I'm trying to push and the films I did, because I even told my therapist that like my scripts are basically our sessions. Like whatever I filtrate from our discussions is like, oh, this childhood trauma over here. Like, yeah, let's make a film about that. And it's very personal. Like I think my creations and what I try to do, it's very personal. I tend to write what I create too, so it aligns with that, with what I direct. But also it's not necessarily about coming out either. It's more of me being queer. How do I approach this life circumstances? Yeah. How does that impact me? It's not necessarily always a coming out story. It's just having as your main character a queer character, and how reality revolves around that fact. So yeah, I think that's pretty much like the base for, or my drive to do what I do.
I was seeing a big react from Amy.
Okay, so when I came out as trans, I also started doing this wonderful thing called LiveJournal. So like some people out there may not know what this is.
LiveJournal LiveJournal was a time.
It was the Tumblr of that time.
Yes.
This is like before Facebook. It was like, I'm going to keep my journal in this weird quasi-social, quasi-public place. And I approached transition with this kind of like cultural studies stuff that I learned at SVU, and it's like, no, I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to like leave like some instructions for the next person who has to come by this way. And I was like keeping track of like, okay, this is how like social stuff seems to shift in ways that I was not expecting, and people were still surprised to find out were hormones. But I realized the media I was consuming affected my dreams, because like I was fortunate that I could work in like a really progressive space at that point. So like I didn't just keep a job, I got a job at the while transitioning, which in 2006 is like, holy shit, what? And use affect my dreams. I didn't necessarily have like this big community of people I felt I could really draw on. A lot of the resources out there were for much more binary affiliated trans people, and the beginning sparks of like the more non-binary space for people who were generally people who were assigned female at birth. And I was like, no, I need to like go see a doctor, and I need to go through this medical process. But at the same time, like I don't feel the need to present outside of this more middle space. What do I do? And so I was like trying to look for every example I could of like butchy women or non-binary people in film. And I did, and like my dreams would change accordingly. And one of my favorite ones though was called By Hook or By Crook, and it is these two non-binary masculine of center transish people who shot a movie on like camcorders back in 2003, and it's super heartfelt and it's super cheap. And the fact that it's cheap makes it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that has inspired me like a few other things. I also like grew up watching a lot of science fiction. I didn't realize until after the fact that like our really long running science fiction fandoms, except for Star Wars, are often based on stuff where they're like, guys, we cannot afford to shoot what you want every week. What are we going to do instead? Cheap cinema really inspires me a lot because it's more accessible. Because like my job now is to work in film budgets, and it's like, okay, you want 50 people on your set working 12 hours a day, and here's all the gear that you need, and there's OT and like turnaround, meal breaks, and all this other stuff, and it very quickly becomes completely unaffordable, except for a very, very rich and thus very, very privileged and thus very, very, very non-diverse and often anti-diverse demographic. And my thing in film has been to try and change that.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can chat a little bit, Jen, if you want to respond a little bit more to this question, and you've been inspired, totally, but I'd love to talk about like your different approach to like sets and working collaboratively, because I mean, the Me Too movement really like shone a light on the horrors of set life for a lot of different people, and luckily it didn't just focus on like the shiniest of the stories, but also went into like other workplaces like in the film industry, and like showed a lot about how like sets are often very unsafe places for you know, anyone who has a kind of a vulnerability or systemic oppression, or, you know, like some reason to be treated poorly or underestimated or overworked or all the things. So yeah, I'm just curious about what your approaches are like, and what are some of the experiences you had that you know maybe didn't want to replicate, and how have you changed them?
It's a difficult one to answer because I don't work in like traditional sets in the sense of having a large crew. My largest crew to date is 4 people, myself included. And so it's such a small number of people that we fall into an understanding that is in some ways, of course, like me and David like balance and share equally the kind of like the power distribution, but also like the labor and the direction of like where the filming is going. But I would say that because we're community oriented, one of the things that because we work in documentary format, we're invitation only. And why that is because we we don't want to parachute into people's lives. We don't want to drop in on a community, remote or otherwise, to put a giant lens on in their world. So when we have invitation to do so, we can then begin that process of like reciprocity, collaboration, partnership, and we work kind of like hand in hand every step of the way. So that's pre-production, during production, and post-production. And we give everyone, well, we give the subjects veto power at the end of the day, even if they've signed a release form. If they don't like the story and how it's portrayed, we will bench that film, which is quite frankly unheard of, I think, in Amy,
it's definitely not a practice in documentary film.
No,
you are seeing it happening more now on larger scales because some big directors have been called out, like Jenny Livingston was called out for Paris is Burning, and David France for the Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, and you know, which is a film that we showed and weren't aware of what had happened until afterwards. And it's strange to watch that film now and reflect upon the, you know, the revelations that a lot of the archival research assistants and Raina Gossett in particular, you know, experienced some like theft of ideas from that director. And but yeah, it's you do see that in documentary a lot, and that's why you see a lot of exploitative documentaries, and you see it in narratives as well too, where people come in who haven't had, you know, like don't have a direct experience with the story they're engaging with, and can be really harmful in the way they portray it.
Yeah. And listen, we have yet to, you know, experience someone who's like, nope, I don't want this story out there, because we have every step of the way brought them into the process of collaboration, even to the point of giving them, you know, co-director titles, credit, as well as inviting them to participate in other creative ways, like contributing to, if they're a songwriter, they might contribute to like the music of the film, you know? And so there's so many different ways that we embed and encode like collaborative practices in the filmmaking process. Because you know, I think David and I have this conversation at length where we don't even necessarily want our names associated like in the credits, because we're all working on this together. There is something really magical, I think, on, if we're calling a set, when we're gathering a group of people and we're creating something artfully. There is something, even if it's documentary, even if it's you know, it's real life and there's a realism to it, there is something magical that happens, or a spark can happen that is so like not anything I could ever kind of quantify or explain. And that's really just, quite frankly, really beautiful. And so I think that I've learned to retrain, I think, my thinking, in that I don't own the creativity that is like coming through my body. It's whatever's coming through my body that I'm releasing, and it's being manipulated and woven into this generative collaborative entity thing that we're all doing together. We own that together, or rather we just release it and nobody owns it. I don't know, but the story wants to be told and it will get told. I don't need to say, oh, that's my idea. But I didn't really answer your question around, you know, the industry practices, or if there's anything I can change, because I don't really have any kind of experience in that specifically. But I do see that there are now, especially in my circle of filmmaker friends, who are more intentional about bringing or having a line in their budget, like this is the like intimacy coordinator or the intimacy officer. And especially in like COVID times, you need to now have like a COVID officer, right? A safety officer on set as well. So I can see already like things are shifting as society is shifting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bruna, Amy, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of working in set, in let's say more on the topic of having more opportunities and things like that, it's interesting because I can look with two perspectives and they both intersect at some point. And one is being like a queer woman, and the other one is related to my race. Um, there is an opening happening, but it feels a bit seasonal yet to me. I don't know. I did see a progress, but it seems to fade every now and then come back. There is a scandal, something happens, explodes. Then every agency
Yeah.
in production are posting things like, "Oh, we're gonna do like a 1550 crew," or "We're just accepting applications for like BIPOC or whatever." And then you get calls, you get all that fuzz. 3 months down the line, everybody disappears. So I don't know. Like I stand in a weird position. At least when we're like, for me, for example, I am trying to apply for short films all the time for funds. And a lot of funds here, at least, have this section that says like preference for queer, BIPOC creators, etc., etc. It's a different story to the people that get selected, actually, but at least there is a mention, and I guess there's more folks getting in than before. But I do feel that it's super formative sometimes, and it's hard to say if, how much has actually changed and how much is just the speech.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It does tend to contract every decade, I feel like.
Sometimes I get scared because the most dangerous I find are the ones that are like it's the performative activism piece and the virtue signaling from every level, and so I get suspicious of that. So I'm like, if you are saying what you're saying, if you're saying you're being diverse and inclusive and you're saying all the right words, I'm like even extra more suspicious for some reason. And then I'd want to be like, well, do it, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's especially, I know we're not talking about cancel culture or any of that, but I think I live in that fear too, though.
I think also something that's happening with the like sort of glut of resources, which we also saw coming out during the year of reconciliation, which was what, 2016, 2017, when all of this money, it was like around Canada 150 nonsense, and all of this money came out, and so much of it was for artistic purposes and cultural purposes. And, a lot of it was about like directed towards, like reconciliation and some kind of collaborations, like with acknowledging the fact that we're on stolen occupied land. But there's no continuity or sustainability from that project. That was nothing. That was like a bunch of money got thrown into the country, and then like mining continues, and Indigenous people are still criminalized and dispossessed. And yeah, you see the same thing with like stories around gender-based violence and sexual assault. And now with like racism is like the hot item, and anti-Black racism as well, like specifically. And so, yeah, it does sometimes seem like it is quite reactionary. And I worry that, I know that something that was happening at Telefilm recently is that they're reevaluating a lot of where their funding is going to go. And, I worry for how they're going to evaluate the projects of filmmakers who have been systemically denied access to resources and training and professional connections, Like, you can't evaluate us on the same, not that we're not insanely talented and brilliant and like geniuses and like all of those things,
Have you
but
had a
you
bunch of
can't.
rich people accept you into your networks? Okay, then now you have
Yeah,
experience.
exactly. You know, like the evaluation process can't be the same as like for a straight white cis man who, you know, like wouldn't have had to face those same challenges. And I feel concerned that because marginalized artists have not had support for so long, where it's such a deficit. And now all of a sudden we get all of these resources, but like it's within a particular time period, because it always is. It's never about like, this is to support the growth of your career, do whatever you want. It's like, this project, this time, capitalism. And how can you, like, you don't have time to catch up with all of the historic stuff and all of the, you know, and then you have the pressure of representing your community, and it's like, anyway, maybe I'm having some feelings about this, clearly.
Well,
A window inside, but yeah, you know, like it's a lot of pressure, and it's unfortunate because so many of us just haven't had a chance to, you know, even have that same luxury and privilege of just getting to imagine and just getting to grow and like see those possibilities ahead of us with minimal struggle. Like, I just don't know what that would be like.
Yeah, I've always semi-seriously joked, but mostly really wanting this, that I would love to see a queer villain, monster, you know, someone or a character that need not worry about representing a community. And I know that stories are powerful, and of course, when misrepresentation happens, it can be very dangerous. I just would love to live in a world where I can be more experimental and push certain artful boundaries. But right now I live in a constant state of fear because there are certain things holding me back, which is to say, you know, because I want to be mindful of my community, I want to be respectful, and I want to honor that history that you speak of, Anushka. But also, I want to look towards the future where I can be playful and bring levity to trauma too, you know, and joke about things, you know. And I really resonate with what Amy was saying around like just like the humor aspect and all of that, because I think it's so important too. Anyway, I'm getting off track.
As far as set environments, what I've found is that there are a very large number of systemic things that are built into film for different jobs that, in addition to forms of more explicit harassment, overt or not so microaggressions, also just like mean that some people have to push the ball uphill while other people are chasing it downhill for their career. So sets, for example, 12 hours a day, minimum, every day, in Langley. So if you don't live there already, you're going to be driving a ways. And who's Langley friendly to? Who can be driving this far? Who has obligations at home to family or dependents, children, etc.? Whose health can do this? Who's going to be told that they're doing their gender wrong if they're not more available for community and kin keeping? Whose family are going to be like, where the fuck are you? Like, this is not, you don't just vanish constantly. When it comes to casting, I watch the big mistake that people do with just having this discussions with people who are like, I want to cast some trans people in this. We can't find anyone. What do we do? And the process of casting is sort of assumes that the people who you are casting have the ability to drop everything and just do your audition and just like, I'll just swap off my shift, or I'm already an actor, and have a job where it's like, no, you can be a good looking, slender, white, young cis person and work at work as a server and get mad tips. And if you need to swap a shift and you like, because your audition is like 10 pages long and due in 2 days, that's fine. You probably won't get it. Whatever, there'll be another one. And if you like, you keep pulling that slot machine long enough, you'll get something. And that there are subtle ways, common sense ways. It's not like thinking outside of the box. I described as thinking in a different box. So like, when the thing I say about casting is just treat it like it's a human resources problem in any other job. Like if you were hiring someone to be a train conductor, you wouldn't be like, okay, we have a train, we need you to be there tomorrow at 4 p.m. You're like, I've already got a job and I don't live in your city. What the hell? You'd say like, okay, it's in a week. Here's roughly when it needs to be done. We have technology where you can record people on video apparently, so we're not in a rush. Here's enough time to prepare, and here are clear instructions about what you need to do. And then in the job description, it's like super clear. It's like, I know a lot of people are being shitty, but just like, we don't give a shit about the following, and here's what we need from the performance, because maybe you haven't been trained in like this particular form of clowning. Mm-hmm. All of these things. And then on set, like I'm often, when I'm on set and I'm not background, I'm often in a position of power, where like I'm one of the producers, but I'm also in the position of being someone on the autism spectrum, who's a little slow about social things. So sometimes I've been like, hey, excuse me, what the fuck is coming out of your mouth? And they're like, we're joking. I'm like, oh. But what we have done in the past is we've like put pronouns on the call sheet, and these like crusty old grips are the people who like move all the really heavy things around. Will be showing up on one day and are like, fuck is this? And we explain, and like a week later they'll be like, hey, I'm Bob, what's your pronoun? It's not that hard to make change if you are one of the people who's in a position where you get to make this change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And you just remind me of a point too about when you were talking about casting and stuff. I think like, as you're saying too, Anushka, we still need separate opportunities. We're not in the same means of like the rest of the population, or like white cis men. It can be the same way of getting that opportunity, because that makes us compete between each other to one spot. Like if you have one role for one trans person, it's like the entire community competing for one thing.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to get already like the scrape of the barrel here. So it's like, okay, what's the other way of doing it, like and meanwhile have Mission Impossible 6 being made, with a huge budget. So not make one of them and then make a fund with that money for for other creators. But yeah, that's the thing that frustrates me. But on the plus side, if you are in a position that you can change things, it's not that hard to do so.
Yeah. Should we sue Tom Cruise? Maybe that's the solution.
We can just get a whole bunch of people. We'll get the entire cast to change their name to Tom Cruise.
That would be amazing.
Like, well, you have one Tom Cruise in your movie. Let me tell you.
Yeah, we've got 50. By the time you figure out which one is the real one, we'll have taken the money and run. Well, we're like nearing the end of our time together. And I know that, Jen, you were talking about aesthetics and artistic risks. And yeah, you are all artists. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about where you come from artistically, and what are some of the filmmakers that you love?
Okay, can I just gush about Chloe Zhao?
Aesthetically, yes,
for
please.
a second. It's not so much. I think Chloe Zhao, like the aesthetically beautiful. Especially, I just watched Nomadland, which is excellent.
Is it very good?
It's excellent. I don't even know how she's so, if you don't know kind of like different kind of regions of China, certain cultural like just like personality, like she's super like just there's a harshness to like her spirit, and it's not meant to be a bad thing. It's just this like very masculine, very like there's a way that she is and she embodies in the world that is very attractive. I don't think she's queer. I'm pretty sure she has a husband. But in any case, I'm going to queer her in the context of her filmmaking, because there's this just her lens is very inspiring. So that's my current like new fave. But in terms of like my own aesthetics, I can't think of any, but I love music videos. And so for me, I actually start with sound. That actually that's how I piece together a film with David. When I have the kind of the music and I can like switch sounds around, that's actually how I am able to like edit in the post-production process. And so I think because I'm inspired and motivated a lot by like music video aesthetics, it's just like very dramatic. And so you don't necessarily see a lot of that in kind of traditional documentary style of filmmaking, but we really like to push the extraness and the extravagance.
Oh, you definitely do. And I didn't know this about you, the music thing, but I think about it and it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
Yeah. And I love drone shots. What can I say? Who doesn't love a good drone shot? But it's like not in a cheesy push in way, but like let's push out. Let's just find other ways of using a drone.
Yeah. Bruna or Amy, any like particular like influences or styles or people? I love asking this question because I like learning. Like I like to know what other people think of, and there's always someone I've like never heard of before, so it's a little bit of a selfish reason, but also and good for the audience because then they can be like, oh, Chloe Zhao, never heard of her, let's go see.
And she's directing I don't know how people feel about Marvel, but she is directing the new Eternals movie.
I know. I'm so excited.
Yeah, but it's just such a weird partnership. Chloe Zhao, this like indie.
They also hired the Black woman who directed Candyman, the new release of Candyman. She's gonna direct something for Marvel. I think the next Captain Marvel movie, she might be directing it.
That makes sense because the main character is a Black woman. So yes. I guess they put that together and that's it.
Shockingly.
Yeah. And at another time, I would love to talk about WandaVision, but we'll save that for next time.
We'll save that juicy goss for later.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
I like to find my inspiration by reaching outside of film. We often, or at least reach outside of the stuff that we're like, when you see something on a bus and someone spent like millions of dollars advertising it, don't watch it. Spend your time on other stuff. Because those other things are going to be solving challenges in a way that will have new and different solutions, because that $1 million movie has solved the problem of how do we get people to watch something that's okay.
Yeah.
We spend a whole bunch of money telling them to watch it, which is their solution to everything. How do we throw lots of money at it.
Yeah.
For the Switch, like our inspirations were like anime and video games and like and web series like that. That's how we made a TV sitcom. For business problems, we're like, okay, well, how does tech do this? How does the military train people to not be assholes to each other? Better diversity training than in the film industry. The short answer there. Much to my surprise.
Wow, that's shocking, and I want to hear more about this later.
I would be happy to go into it.
I
was like, are you sorry?
I kind of believe you.
it's a federal government employer, and it also exists within more of a command economy as opposed to a market economy. So they can be like, no, you will study the following. We're paying you for your time anyway, no matter what you do.
That's true.
But taking a look, how does Doc shoot something, and then be like, can we apply that to a scripted series? Look outside of what we're being told to watch. Look at old films. Look at films from across the world. Look at different formats. Look at web videos.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie though, TV, we're in the golden era of TV. So I do spend an enormous amount of time watching like just these high quality production value, like TV series, like limited series, true crime, everything. Like they're so good right now. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bruna.
No worries. It's funny because my current biggest inspirations, they do not portray the style of filmmaking that I personally do, but I cannot mention Michaela Coel with I May Destroy You. It's probably one of the most amazing pieces of television I have ever seen in my life. And like the rawness of everything, I'm really drawn to those hyper realism, and but there is a sense of, there's a dreaminess to it, but the core of the fact is something that actually happened to her. So yeah, that for me, it's definitely my biggest current inspiration. And the director, sorry, forgot her name, but the director of Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Oh,
I forgot it.
I've forgotten her name.
Yeah, but
oh wow, I feel like I
failed.
Yeah, I feel like I just lost my job.
No, we just
that was like
the at the beginning. We talked about this. The short-term memory is a product. It's a symptom of the pandemic. So we're all off the hook.
There is no blame here, exactly.
No.
Celine Sciamma. Oh.
Exactly. That for me, it's probably the best queer film I have ever seen personally. But those are my current big inspirations. But in a non-queer female side of things, what I did grow up watching was a lot of Charles Kaufman, and that definitely impacts on the way I do my stories, which is I like to define, like, I hope it feels like a fever dream. And the narrative is somewhere in the middle, but yeah, like that's definitely how I would classify my style of filmmaking. And if I can drag inspiration from the realism of the directors I like, then I think it's like the perfect match for at least character creation. But funny that I also come up with my ideas through music. That's the beginning of the process. Almost like every time I'm listening to something that I would listen when I was teaching, for example, and I was like, oh yeah, this, and then it all comes together. Even though being like a very visual person, it's when I hear something that suddenly the entire story just builds on my brain, and I was like, okay, that's it. But yeah, I think that's, in terms of style, something more surreal, but with a drop of realism in music. I guess that's how to define it.
Yeah. I love that you all brought like different art forms, and that different art forms play a role in your filmmaking practice, because I really do think that like art, it just gets pulled apart so often and categorized into these, neat little boxes. And I love it, like the interdisciplinary kind of nature of like pulling for inspiration and for ways to tell stories. And film is such a full-bodied sensory, like it can be such a sensory experience. And so it's cool that you're all pulling from like these other genres and forms of art. I really love that. Is there anything that you would want to share or chat about before we sign off? And then the last thing that I would ask you is to just pump yourselves up. So if you are working on things, if you have websites and social media presences and reasons that people should follow you and form, I don't know, cult audiences around you of some kind in a non-aggressive, nice way. Yeah, that would be my last request before we say goodbye. But I am so grateful for everything you all shared. You're all brilliant, and I'm right now is such a hard time. I'm such an extrovert, and so I get so much by being around people. So right now, I truly, Amy, your analogy of the taking away vitamin B for a year, I kind of feel that on a body level. I miss people and I miss other artists and storytellers. So it's been a real privilege to be able to speak to the three of you, because I think you're brilliant. So thank you for sharing your time with me and by extension, the internet and Vancouver. Who wants to pump themselves up first?
I guess I can. Pump is just such a funny word.
I don't know why I picked it.
No, it's great. I guess I could plug. So I am a member of the Value Co-op, which is the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Cooperative, and right now Love Intersections and Value Co-op we have been there's an ongoing series called Hot Pot Talks, which you can see behind me on the banner, Hot Pot Talks, where we have free-flowing, it's a weekly Wednesday series at 5 p.m. Pacific time, where we have free-flowing conversations with artists, poets, chefs, community organizers, activists, filmmakers, a DJ that's coming up. And we talk about like, what is our ethical responsibility of being an artist? How do we do art making in the pandemic? All of these like cool, fun things, really heartwarming conversations. And it's been this lovely consistency that I've had and some much needed structure that I have every Wednesday. So I do want to pump that up or pump that out. I don't know. And you can find it on the Love Intersections YouTube page. It's also on the Facebook page for Love Intersections. So just Google us. And thanks for this conversation. I do appreciate a good Zoom panel where it's not the typical like assembly line of answering questions. So it's been lovely. Thank you so much.
So like plug our pluggables and like final thoughts.
Yes.
These are like an overlap for me. So the thing I would really stress, if people are making anything that's like, actually just about anything where there's this, you're trying to raise a substantial amount of money, if you're feeling frustrated going to the government for like Telefilm or Storyhive, there's a thing called the tax credit, where if you have a whole bunch of money, the government will just give you more of it. No, almost very few questions asked. You fill out the paperwork, you just get the money. So if you are trying to make anything that costs $30,000 or more, hit me up and ask me questions about the tax credit. We consult on this for free.
What? Okay, I'll email you later.
Absolutely, yeah. It's more of like a phone call thing because it's complicated, but okay. It's like under certain circumstances, there is almost guaranteed large amounts of money from the government for film and television, but it's directed at people who don't need it. And we're trying to figure out how to change that to make it more accessible for local independent filmmakers. 2.
That's wild. I had no idea about that secret money loophole.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Amy.
So, you're welcome. So a film that costs like $70 million to make, the government's paying 20.
Wow.
Yep. And that scales. So
wowza.
Call me and let's talk about this thing. You can also look it up. You can call Creative BC and ask to talk about the tax credit there. It is a complicated, awful, barrier-full system, but it's there, and it's a way that independent Canadian film can help get things done. 2. Once we're allowed to start hanging out again, and I hear that there is news from the government that is slowly opening as of today, we're going to be having a meetup called People Who Give a Fuck, which is about people who give a damn or a fuck or whatever about diversity in filmmaking, trying to network with each other so that we can support each other's stuff, where it's like, oh, hey, we have tables and chairs. Would you like some tables and chairs? Oh, you know how to do drone stuff. That's fantastic. I keep crashing my drone. Let's hang out and support each other. Once as soon as it's possible, we're going to start like showing up at a restaurant and talking and seeing what comes out of it. You can look me up at www.tremblingvoid.com. That's trembling like shaking, void like space. And I'm also involved in a project called hashtag This Is Season 0, where we're doing open development on how you make a optimistic, realistic science fiction TV series from scratch to show other people how this project works. And we're trying to rethink how this gets done, because we don't want to just be like, well, you come up with an amazing project and then you attract Tom Cruise to it, and then you go to your rich friends and they give you $50 million and the government gives you 20. We're showing like, how do you change this and make this thing a more affordable, accessible way? How do you do research so that your stories are about something that's relevant and real? How do you get this in front of people so people will actually see this beautiful thing that you made? And how do you do this without just asking people to work for free? So that's us. This is season 0. It hasn't come out just yet.
That's really cool.
Probably about 2 weeks.
That's a really, really cool project. Awesome.
Thanks. Bruna.
Well,
Bruna.
in terms of promoting myself, there's not a lot to promote currently. I haven't been doing a lot last year, but I do wrote a lot, so I hope I can get, maybe after I have a call with you, I can figure out how to make those scripts, how to put those scripts into action. But I do have most of the content, because besides film, I do music videos. Sometimes I tap a little bit into short form or documentary as well. And those things, I'm making a website at the moment for myself with that. But for now, you can find on my Vimeo page, which is just my first name and my last name, Bruna Arbex. That's my Vimeo page. And yeah, like that's where you can find my content. But my 2 cents on what we all as a community can gather and do is to somehow try to not run into situations that we're competing with each other, and try to support each other and take turns, I guess, like we do your thing now and then we do mine and then we do yours. And on that level, we can all get some of our projects going in terms of support, rather than just competing for whatever fun comes up, or we can all work more together. I hope in the future, a little bit far from COVID, that's going to be more doable, but that's the only thing I could hope for, that we kind of turn the F word a little bit for the big industry and the system, and then we can gather who don't want to go through the traumatizing process of like applying for that over and over, and figure out a way of doing things with our own hands by ourselves. So
yeah, well, I love that all 3 of you have like your own unique way of approaching this art practice, and yet you also like share so many values, as we could like see from this conversation. So it's been really lovely to have the 3 of you chat together, and I just want to thank you so much again for being with us. And it's also so nice to be able to like shine a light on all of you, because you're all local filmmakers working in our community. And I, for one, I miss all of the local filmmakers and all of my local community right now, because we can't hang out with each other yet, but maybe soon. But thank you all for joining me virtually today. I really appreciate it.